Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to break down how one tragic, violent act in Washington, D.C. triggered a massive policy change. A change that basically put the lives and futures of thousands of Afghan allies on ice indefinitely.
So let's start with the announcement itself. This just appeared online and wow, it was stunningly blunt. No warning, no real explanation, just boom, a full stop, an indefinite freeze on every single immigration request for Afghan nationals. The speed and just the sheer scope of this decision were incredible, right? It affected everyone, no matter where they were in the immigration process. Which brings us to the biggest question of all. How could the actions of one single person lead to such a drastic, nationwide policy? Let's get into it.
Okay, so before we dig into the why of it all, let's first get our heads around the what. What did this sudden freeze actually mean for people on the ground? What were the immediate, real-world consequences?
Yeah, this wasn't some targeted pause on just, new folks applying. This was a blanket policy that caught everyone. People who had just gotten here seeking asylum, families who were well on their way to getting green cards to build a life here. Suddenly, everybody was trapped in the exact same limbo.
All right, now let's rewind. Let's go back to the tragic event that was used as the reason, as the catalyst for this whole situation. So here's the sequence of events. You have Rahmanullah Lakanwal, an Afghan refugee who came into the U.S. back in 2021. He was granted asylum just this year. Then, this week, he travels all the way to Washington, D.C., opens fire at a metro station, and tragically kills a National Guard member. It was this one horrific act of violence that became the flashpoint for a massive political and policy debate.
And this right here is a really crucial detail. Lakanwal came to the U.S. as part of Operation Allies Welcome. Now, this wasn't just some generic program. It was created for a very specific reason: to resettle the Afghans who had worked with the United States during the 20-year war. So he wasn't just any refugee. He was part of a group the U.S. had made an explicit promise to protect.
So with that context, let's look at the political reaction. The source material we're looking at really dives into how this tragic, isolated incident was almost immediately framed by the administration. The focus shifted fast. As you can see from this quote, within hours, the conversation was no longer about one person's horrific crime. It blew up into a call to re-examine every single Afghan who had been brought to the U.S.
And this is where you see a huge clash of narratives. On one hand, you have the administration claiming that thousands of refugees were just let in with sloppy or questionable vetting. But on the other hand, the source material points out that actually, refugees and visa holders go through an incredibly rigorous, multi-step, and often years-long screening process to even set foot in the U.S.
And the context here is absolutely key. The source we're looking at argues that the timing of this attack was, let's say, politically convenient. The administration was facing a lot of heat over the economy, and according to the source, this horrible event gave them a chance to change the subject and double down on their established anti-immigrant platform.
Now, this political rhetoric, it wasn't just talk. It had immediate and, frankly, devastating consequences for the very people who had been promised safety and a new life.
And the number of people we're talking about is just staggering. We are talking about thousands of individuals, thousands of lives, thousands of families, thousands of futures, just thrown into chaos because of this one decision.
And look at how wide this net was cast. It wasn't just new asylum seekers. We're talking about families who are on the path to becoming permanent residents. We're talking about our military allies, the interpreters, the guides who risked their lives for U.S. troops, now stuck in third countries waiting for visas. And of course, families who are just desperate to be reunited. In one single moment, all the promises made to all of them were put on hold.
Okay, so for the final piece, let's zoom out. Because according to the source material, this decision didn't just happen in a vacuum. It's presented as one piece of a much larger agenda.
This wasn't some isolated event. The source connects the dots to a much larger pattern. A tough stance on immigration has been a core part of the administration's policy from the start. I mean, just days before this Afghan freeze, they ended temporary protected status for Haitians, and that was followed by a stated goal to pause migration from all so-called third world countries. And the analysis here points toward a specific demographic vision for the country. The source suggests that these actions, which target immigrants from places like Haiti and Afghanistan, are part of a broader vision for an America that is predominantly white and Christian. And the source brings up another really critical factor. This policy also works as a distraction. The argument is that by shifting the focus onto Afghan refugees, the administration can pivot away from the really difficult legacy of the war in Afghanistan itself. You know, a 2-decade conflict that caused trillions of dollars and didn't exactly end in a clear victory.
So after all of this, we're left with one final lingering question, and it's a big one. It's about loyalty and promises and the real cost of politics. What happens when the promises you make to your allies on the battlefield suddenly crash into a new political reality back home?